July 2nd, 1997.
Somebody will listen to me.
He was an American original.
I never saw a frame of film in which I felt that Jimmy was, quote, acting, where the acting showed.
And I'm shaking the dust of this crummy little town off my feet, and I'm going to see the world.
He was someone we could all identify with.
He was a very generous, amiable, intelligent, perceptive man.
Get me back! I don't care what happens to me! Get me back to my wife and kids!
To my big brother George, the richest man in town.
Tonight, A Wonderful Life, remembering Jimmy Stewart.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
I don't think it's just imagination or nostalgia at work here. There was a time in the history of American entertainment from the mid-late 30s to the early 50s, before television really took hold, when the Hollywood dream factory was at its peak. It still creates blockbusters and stars, but it has never again played as large a role in the fabric of American life. A handsome young Englishman by the name of Archibald Alexander Leach became Cary Grant. A tall, rangy, broad-shouldered young man by the name of Marion Robert Morrison somehow emerged from the Hollywood processing machine as John Wayne. William Clark became Clark Gable, and each took his special place in the galaxy. But there was also a handful of stars who kept not only their own names in one form or another, they also seemed to be playing themselves. Two of them have died within the past 24 hours. Robert Mitchum, who always carried a little of that don't give a damn attitude into every role he portrayed. He got busted and briefly jailed a couple of times. That only served to enhance the image. Robert Mitchum died yesterday. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there was the personification of good old down-to-earth, give you the shirt off his back, plain-spun American values. That was Jimmy Stewart. He died today. He was 89.
You have the advantage on me. You know my name, and I don't know yours. And right back at me, he said, "What name do you like?" Well, I didn't even have to think twice about that. Harvey's always been my favorite name.
But I've never been very good at learning lines. It's always been a very hard task for me. The hemming and hawing and the stuttering and everything, I was thinking about what I said next.
And this is the interesting thing about the whole thing. He said, "What a coincidence. My name happens to be Harvey."
But Jimmy Stewart did pretty well for a man who couldn't remember his lines. He became one of our greatest film actors with a screen persona based on a kind of all-American ordinariness. He was the everyman who could play anyone, and that required remarkable range.
I think people now think of Jimmy Stewart as a kind of grumpy good guy who came from a small town and represents these kind of traditional American values, but actually there's another side of Jimmy Stewart that is anguished and obsessive. After all, there are two sides to the American dream. There's the dream and then there's the nightmare. And I think that Stewart expressed both in his range.
He was a thorough actor, a complete actor, and he was stage trained.
Well, I'm not licked. And I'm going to stay right here and fight for this lost cause, even if this room gets filled with lies like these.
As an example of his versatility, the idea that somebody who could look at home in the drawing rooms of the Philadelphia Story and equally at home on the back of a horse, holding a rifle.
I don't like tricks myself, so that makes us even.
In a 1987 documentary with Johnny Carson, Jimmy Stewart talked about why he made the switch to Western movies shortly after returning from service in World War II.
I think it was just I'd matured.
Yeah.
4.5 years away and not much older, and I think I just matured also
Stewart's best-known and most loved film may well be It's a Wonderful Life. Stewart said that when director Frank Capra phoned him to describe the project, he was immediately intrigued.
That I'm shaking the dust of this crummy little town off my feet, and I'm going to see the world.
Hello, Daddy.
When your father dies, and you have to take over the building alone.
3, 2, 1, bingo! We made it!
And finally, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to jump off a bridge, and an angel by the name of Clarence, he comes down to help you, but he can't swim. So you go down and save the... He said, this really doesn't sound very good, does it? I said, Frank, if you want me to be in a picture about a guy that wants to kill himself, and an angel comes down named Clarence, and he can't swim, and I saved... when do we start?
A toast to my big brother George, the richest man in town.
How about you, young man? Huh? How about you?
You take care, Bishop.
During the Second World War, a lot of Hollywood stars worked with and for the military, but most of them never left California. He had flown as a bomber pilot during that same war.
I was drafted. I keep saying that's the only lottery I've ever won. You know, there are 5, 6, 7 million people. And my number was 380. I went to go for a physical, and I weighed 130 pounds. And they said, don't weigh enough.
Movie actor Jimmy Stewart shows the results of his new diet. He gained 10 pounds, enough to pass the Army's requirements. So now he's in camp, ready to be turned into a soldier.
Stewart had been an avid pilot before he was drafted. He was eventually put in command of a bomber squadron in Europe flying combat missions over Nazi-occupied territory.
Oh, I did it just as much as everybody else. I mean, everybody's scared, and you just had to handle that, and afraid a lot.
Some of you may remember, I was a bomber pilot in World War II. That was back when the Air Force inventory was a relatively simple one. There were long-range, heavy bombers like this one. I flew one of these, old B-24. As a matter of fact, this is some of my handiwork as a model airplane builder. I know the kids make them out of plastic nowadays. This is the old-fashioned wood type. I had a lot of sandpaper on it. They called us truck drivers, the fighter pilots did. Of course, we needed fighter support in order to get through. These fighters, they were sort of like traffic cops who cleared the way for us to Berlin, Hamburg, Essen, Cologne. And sometimes it took some clearing. But whether these fighters fought aggressive actions or defensively as interceptors shooting the other fellow down before he could strike at us, their role was clear. They were fighters, and they fought. But right about here, in the early days of World War II, when flights above 10,000, 15,000 feet first became commonplace, we encountered something new. Because of the thinning out of the air, pilots and crewmen first began to take their own ground-level atmosphere along with them. But the race for speed and altitude went on. And for quite some time now, the military aircraft has been a sealed vehicle traveling at altitudes at which man can't normally survive without wearing special clothes and without bringing oxygen along with him.
13 years younger than Jimmy Stewart was a young sergeant who served under Colonel Stewart's command.
Staff Sergeant Walter Matthau, 1206-2683.
Now, you were telling me a story before, and I find it hard to believe that a man as amiable and genial as you would get into trouble with some other colonel, but apparently you did.
I guess I was insubordinate, and this other colonel wanted to have me shot. Jimmy Stewart saved my life. He said, no, let's not shoot him. Let's send him on detached service over to France.
So Jimmy Stewart saved your life?
I would say that.
After the war, Jimmy Stewart joined the Air Force Reserve, ultimately rising to the rank of Brigadier General. At least one of his Hollywood friends did considerably better. He became Commander-in-Chief.
Here he is, Ronald Reagan.
The MC would introduce
Jimmy Stewart, and then Jimmy would introduce me.
After the war, Jimmy Stewart had gone back to acting. One day in 1948, a new generation showed up on the lot in the person of Tony Curtis.
Which meant really a lot to me. It was the first day at the studio and the first movie star that I saw while I was out there.
By the next year, 1949, Jimmy Stewart was 41. He married for the first and last time.
When I married Jimmy, I had 2 boys. They were very young. I think 4 and 3 or something like that. And Jimmy was just a naturally good father. He was willing to listen and play with them and through the football. And when the twins were born, he was just as natural with them. There was no difference to Jimmy between the stepchildren and his own at all. It was in 1969. Our son was, oldest boy was in Vietnam. He was a Marine.
He wanted to be a Marine. He wanted to, and I encouraged him. I thought that was wonderful. And he became a good Marine. And on the field of battle, he conducted himself in a gallant manner. And I don't think that's a tragedy. It's a loss. It's a terrible, terrible loss. But tragic? No. He died for his country.
Oh. Hi, Steve.
You're working for a major studio on those days.
Goodbye. It's all right, sis. I guess I have
If you weren't on a little part in a big picture or a big part on a little picture.
And please don't call me Cornelius, Uncle Elmer. I told you 100 times the fellas all call me Corn. I like that.
There were times there where I actually had parts in 3 pictures at once.
I don't want a single move out of any one of you.
You learn your craft by working at it. This was with Jean Harlow, something that was sort of a goodbye scene. We were going to kiss goodbye. And at the end of the rehearsal, Jean kissed me. Well, I'd never been kissed like that before. She really let me have it. And this was only the rehearsal. Clarence Brown was directing. Clarence Brown said, all right, are we ready for a take? And this was better than the last one. He had me do it 3 times. 4 times counting the rehearsal. And she was a good kisser.
Oh, come on now. Oh, you must be plumb tuckered out.
Marlene Dietrich knew, she knew everything about making movies. We were doing a scene, and she said, remind me to tell you something after we do this scene.
You sure have a knack of making a stranger feel right at home, ma'am. Yeah. Nice knowing you.
Thank you very much, sir.
It's a great thrill to me to receive this trophy.
It was about 3:45 when I got home, and the phone rang, and it was my father. And he said, here on the radio, they gave you a prize or something. What is it, a plaque or a statue? What kind of a prize is it? I told him it was sort of a statue. And he said, well, send it home to me and I'll put it in the hardware store window. So the next day I got it and I packed it up and sent it. It was there for 20 years.
And so we'll start right out by seeing if we can put you in the mood.
You'll be seeing me. Every time you bed down for the night, you'll look back into the darkness and wonder if I'm there. And some night I will be.
I wanted to do as much of the action as I could. I don't think you ever stop learning to act. I think if you can do a part and not have the acting show, then then believability starts sneaking in. And if you get those people down in the audience believing what's going on up there, well, then you're in pretty good shape.
Get me back, I don't care what happens to me. Get me back to my wife and kids. Help me, Clarence, please.
How would you like to be remembered?
Well, I'd say a guy that believed in hard work and decent values, and love of country, love of family, love of community.
In fact, Jimmy Stewart made more than 20 pictures between 1935 and 39 alone. Over the course of 46 years, Jimmy Stewart appeared in about 80 movies. Now, that's a body of work. The miracle is that so much of it was so good. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.